Heads of states in almost all major European countries are up against one challenge that's common to them all: dwindling popularity and negative public opinion, from Starmer in Britain to Macron in France and newly elected German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Popularity points of major European leaders are in a nosedive. Starting with the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing strong headwinds. The rise of Reform UK and its leader Nigel Farage is sending shockwaves through Britain's politics. Just over 1 year after the election, Starmer's popularity has slipped to number 2, a whopping 14% behind the leader. Nigel Farage's Reform UK party has surged to number 1 with 32%. Conservatives are at third with 16% support. The sentiment on Starmer is the same on approval ratings. Nearly 74% of the people are not happy with Starmer's performance. His approval ratings now stand at just 24%. Not just this, Keir Starmer's government has been rocked by a series of resignations. First, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, then the dismissal of his US Ambassador Peter Mandelson after leaked files revealed his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. On top of this, public anger is rising over irregular immigration, boat crossings and street protests. Just across the English Channel, French President Emmanuel Macron is also in political quicksand. His government is effectively cuffed with a fractured parliament and fierce public opposition to his budget cut plans. Prime Minister François Bayrou's ouster, Sébastien Lecornu taking over, protests by the Block Everything group and the nationwide strikes, all these events happening in quick succession, show that France is in deep crisis. French President Macron's popularity is in the trenches. His disapproval ratings are up in the 70s, 77% to be exact. Approval ratings down into the late teens. The figures clearly suggest Macron is one of the least popular heads of state in Europe. Let's talk about the German Chancellor then. Friedrich Merz also facing a surge of the right wing. Months after election, Germany's far-right party, the AfD party, has overtaken Merz's Christian Democratic Union. According to the latest poll released by polling agency, AfD is marginally ahead of Merz's CDU with 26%. CDU has slipped to number 2 with 25%. This is the first time that a far-right party is leading in polls in Germany. It extends to Spain too. Spain's socialist prime minister's wife is facing corruption charges. Sanchez has accused judges of political bias over the case. Then the Netherlands is heading to a snap election after the far-right party for freedom left the coalition government over a disagreement about the migration policy. All in all, this ailment of sorts of popularity rates plummeting afflicts nearly all major European powers. The power corridors in one hand and the streets on the other hand seem to be in a major disagreement. For more on this, we now have with us James Jackson, who's a journalist and political analyst. He is joining us live from Berlin. Thank you so much for joining us on Race to Power.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
Now, James, of course, we are seeing this plunge in popularity among the heads of state in Europe. What do you think this points towards? I would say it's a major shift that we're seeing right now. What would you say are the major factors driving the shift?
I absolutely think it could be a major shift. This could be the beginning of a new political settlement across Europe where far-right parties manage to enter power. I don't think that's going to happen this year, but maybe next year even. Some people have talked about Keir Starmer stepping down, whether he can be replaced, whether there'll be early elections just 1 or 2 years after he won a record-breaking majority for his Labour Party. But he doesn't seem to be able to have captured the country's confidence since winning that, which was more based on, losing faith in his opponents, the Conservatives, who have also dropped in support massively. In fact, the last poll I saw from the United Kingdom showed that the Labour and Tories, the Conservatives combined, were actually less than Reform UK, the party of Nigel Farage. So really, I think this is a revolutionary moment for the new right, far right. And I think there are a number of factors there. I think charisma is part of it. We've got to look across Europe for that. And, if you compare Keir Starmer, who's a sort of lawyerly figure, He's not very charismatic or confident. I think he could have possibly been a good prime minister at a different moment. But this is one where there's dissatisfaction across the West. And immigration has been a key factor in polling. This is cyclical. This often happens in Europe, but it seems to the wave doesn't seem to be ebbing. Now, I don't actually think that's all about immigration. I think in large part that's actually about inflation, about economic insecurity, and about voters not feeling confident that they can still pay their bills, that they can remain in the middle class. And we've seen historically that this is actually one of the key drivers of far-right support. Ironically, of course, if you don't have migrants, then that likely means that prices are going to continue rising because of labor shortages. So there won't be enough workers out there to be able to work in service jobs, in manufacturing and industry, and that means that's terrible for the economy. So, the far right doesn't seem to have an accurate answer for how to put money back into people's pockets, but the centre right and the centre left, as we see in Germany, in the UK, is not able to capture voters' confidence, and also doesn't have a good answer for inflation, frankly. So if you look at economist Isabella Weber, she writes about anti-fascist economics, which means that fighting against the far right by giving people more money, effectively.
Right, of course, now we've seen protests in France, as you mentioned. We're seeing what's happening in the UK. We are seeing the surge of the right in Germany as well. What would you say, and you mentioned the economy, of course, and the inflation. Would you say that is the common denominator, and what do these heads of state need to do to course correct at this point?
Listen, I do think that the economy is the key point, but there are wider geopolitical trends. There's the fact that the US is treating Europe ever more as a vassal rather than as an ally. The rise of populism. I think social media has plays a role in that. Ultimately, as people get quite quick sound bites immediately, and they're not mediated through the mainstream media, broadcasters, newspapers, in the same way that they used to be, which means that sound bites about stopping migration. We saw actually Zia Yusuf from the chairman of the UK's Reform actually said, we need to stop the Boris wave. The Boris wave was a quite cheeky, quite denigrating description of migration during Boris Johnson's premiership. But when millions of people actually arrived in the UK, so arguably the change of pace in migration in certain countries across Europe actually was quite unsustainable, especially in the UK, because it came just after they voted for Brexit, a vote which was largely about migration. So actually, it seems like the UK stopped bringing Polish plumbers over and started bringing, Bangladeshi bus drivers over, whatever that may be. And I feel like a lot of voters in the UK think they didn't vote for that when they voted for Brexit. And Boris, they feel betrayed by the Conservatives. They feel let down by Labour. And Reform UK, of course, it's not a coincidence that Zia Yusuf is the one delivering this message, who comes from a Muslim background himself. There's another interesting factor about the far right in many countries, which is that it's increasingly not white. So we also see, and not the typical image of straight white, not, typically, if we look at Germany, we also see that the AfD's leader, Alice Weidel, she's a lesbian, openly living with a woman born in Sri Lanka, sorry, not South Africa. So, we're seeing a diversification of the far right, and we're seeing established parties unable to meet the challenge.
All right. Well, James, thank you so much for joining us on Race to Power with your insights on this.
Thanks for having me.